Welcome to Talking Sense. I'm Catharine Richert, and we're so pleased that you decided to stop by today. Talking Sense is NPR's big election year project that's aimed at helping you have better conversations with people who see politics differently than you do. And what better time to talk about this in a kind of wild and unexpected election year? We are recording this conversation at the Minnesota State Fair. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of take a quick poll of the audience here. I want you to raise your hand if you found yourself really struggling to connect with a person who you otherwise have a really good relationship with because of political differences. All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, I won't even count. We have at least a dozen, maybe more, in the audience. Okay. Now, how many of you have had a relationship with a friend or family member end or go on hiatus because of political differences? Quite a few. Yeah, I think at least 12, maybe 13, 14. So we have the people that you want to talk to with us today. And we have a great lineup of guests as well who are going to teach you how to get into it without getting angry. Our hope is that you come away with a little more confidence having political conversations that actually broaden your understanding of your community and the people who mean the most to you, and figure out how to get through some of these hot button issues instead of having conversations that just go off the rails. So I want to introduce our first two guests. First, I have Bill Doherty. He's a family and marriage therapist at the University of Minnesota, and he's co-founder of an organization called Braver Angels. And by the way, MPR News has partnered with Braver Angels on this Talking Sense project. And if you have any questions about the work they're doing, we have Melinda and Bruce over here who can fill you in on how to get involved as well. Bill, tell us a little bit about Braver Angels. Where'd you come up with this idea?
Well, Braver Angels is a nonprofit that got started right after the 2016 presidential election. Does
just a little one, just a little.
Remember that election? Anybody recollect about that? And our mission is to bring people together across the rancorous political divide. And we have workshops. We do sponsor one-to-one conversations. Lots of ways to help people learn to communicate and disagree better. And by the way, we have more members per capita, Braver Angels in Minnesota, than any other state by far.
Yeah. Yes, Minnesota.
By far.
And Bill, tell me a little bit about the moments. You describe a situation in the days after the 2016 election where this idea sort of came to you and some colleagues. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it was a few days after that election when two colleagues of mine were on the phone together. One lives in New York City, Manhattan, Blue America. The other lives in Southwest Ohio, Red America. And they were on the phone talking about how people were feeling about the election in those two parts of the country. In Manhattan, the world was ending, and in Ohio, Southwest Ohio, morning in America. And they decided on the spur of the moment to get 10 Hillary Clinton voters and 10 Donald Trump voters in Ohio together for 13 hours over a weekend in December to see if they could talk with each other, not just about each other. And then they called me, and I said, "You're very brave." And I said, "What were you thinking of doing with them?" And they said they didn't know that part, but they thought I could figure that part out. And I took the plunge. It was a beautiful experience, and we kept going.
Clearly, you've been successful. You're bigger, and you're around in most states in the country now with
and thousands of workshops.
Yeah. Okay, so Corey, we have Corey Yeager to Bill's left over here. He is also a marriage and family therapist. He's worked with the Detroit Pistons, and you've worked in the Minneapolis Public Schools. So Corey, tell us a little bit about your own work in this depolarization space.
Well, as a marriage and family therapist, one of the things that we're always concerned about is how these systems, family systems, are surviving and thriving. And in this political climate, one thing that we know is there's tons of tension. Right? We all feel that relatively consistently. So in the therapeutic realm, it's coming up, right? We're hearing about this more and more often. So having the opportunity to discuss this with family members that may not be agreeing or actually have found themselves not discussing this at all and it's festered, it's coming into that therapeutic arena and we're talking about it more. So as that kind of took off, especially over the last couple of years, Dr. Doherty is kind of engaged with me, talked with me. I've done a number of conversations with him. And I think it's been quite helpful for the people in my world that have struggled.
I think that politics and therapy are two words that people don't often hear in the same sentence.
This is true.
Right. But it makes sense when you think about it.
It does make sense. The opportunity to get your thoughts out there and have an unbiased third party say, all right, let's talk through this, as opposed to letting it fester, I think this is an important element.
So, Bill, I feel like every year we're like, it's an unprecedented election year. But this year, given the latest news of the summer, it does feel really different, even compared to the last two cycles, which were deeply polarized and contentious. Why is this work so important right now at this moment in history?
Well, as a country, we are more polarized than we've been since the Civil War. And this is not me saying it, it's historians saying it. And it's infected every part of our life, our workplaces, our faith communities, and our families, schools, just every area of life you could imagine. And so we have to find a way to live with these differences, to be constructive with the differences, and not believe that the sky is going to fall every election.
Yeah, and that's hard work to do, right? Yeah. And Corey, I want to talk to you a little bit about something that Talking Sense really focuses on. And when we talk about navigating challenging political conversations with people we care about, that could be a neighbor, that could be a friend, but this is all really particularly hard on families, and especially people who share the same house, right? Why is it so hard to talk about political differences when it comes to these, blood relationships?
Because I think oftentimes our ideology, the way that we see the world, almost becomes who we are, right? That it's not just something that I think, it's who I am. And if someone else doesn't agree with this, we almost as human beings, human nature is saying, I want you to agree. So we're going to talk about this over and over, and I'm going to get you to agree. And I think it's a mistake we make as humans. Instead of engaging others seeking agreement, let's engage others seeking understanding. Right? That's much more important. I can totally disagree with you and understand you at the same time. And I don't think we do a great job of that. And within the family system, that's really going to be a struggle because I see you every day. And we're talking about things, and the news is on, and I'd have one position and you have another, and we continue to argue about this or not talk about it, and it festers itself, and that doesn't go away. So finding ways in which to engage in those conversations, or at least figure out that civility within the family system is really important, not just for the family system, but for our country overall.
Right. It feels like there's a lot.
If I could add something to that, just to follow what Corey's saying. Family members often communicate, not that you're just wrong about this, but there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
Something wrong with you.
Yes.
Okay. And then you return fire.
Yes.
And so then people start to disconnect. And so the intimacy of family relationships adds this level of intensity.
Right. There's a lot at risk, right? And also, I think when it's a family member, it's like, did I actually never really know this person when they're political, when you start to disagree.
And the last piece I would add, Catherine, is that we can't afford for our country and our family systems to be disconnected. Now more than ever, we need each other. We need each other. So what are we doing to heal that divide? And this work is really attacking that divide, closing that gap.
Yeah. So Bill, you've been a family marriage therapist for a long time, and you've been working at the intersection of therapy and politics for almost a decade now. And I'm wondering how much you're seeing people have these disagreements. Are you seeing it more often? I mean, is this something that is coming to you regularly and increasing?
Oh boy, yes. So I've been a family therapist for over 40 years. It wasn't until 10 years ago that I saw people threaten divorce over who their spouse votes for. People who had lived comfortably with inter-party marriages now are saying, you vote for that person and I may not stay with you. People not attending Thanksgiving dinner over this. So it is much worse. And as Corey is saying, we have to figure out a way to live with this political polarization and not have it infect our families. It's like a viral load coming at us.
Corey, what about you? I mean, what's your observation?
No, I think that what Doc said is exactly the point. And one of the things that we have to recognize is, as a country, really great civilizations, they don't struggle from the outside usually. They struggle from within. And things like this help that struggle. We don't want that to continue in our country. So seeing this divide widen itself is that's not what we need. So how are we pulling ourselves back together? How are we understanding one another that pushes us forward as opposed to stalling out conversations and being upset more so consistently?
If you're just joining us, we are having a conversation about how to have challenging political conversations and do it better. We at NPR have developed an online tool with Braver Angels that you can find at our website at mprnews.org/Talking Sense, which is on our t-shirts right here. And you can also learn more about the work that Braver Angels is doing in Minnesota and beyond from Bruce and Melinda over here, if that's something you're interested in. So we've been talking sort of abstractly about these family conflicts and people living together who have different political differences. But now I want to bring to the stage two people who have, in fact, lived this. Because what better way to learn than to talk to two people who've done this already? I want to bring to the stage Barbara Thomas and Rick Hotchner. Rick, Barbara. You good? Feel free to adjust there.
Sure.
All right. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Good to be here.
Let's do some introductions first. Barbara, how did you and Rick meet?
We met at work overseas. I was a diplomat, and we were serving in Latin America, and Rick came to serve at that same post.
And Rick, what were you doing before you retired?
So I was a CIA officer. I was an operations officer. I went overseas and did espionage.
I would like to have Rick back on a show just about what it's like to be a spy, but that's for a different time, I think. So you guys had these really kind of incredible careers where you were living overseas.
Mm-hmm.
How many countries did you guys live in?
Well, five different countries overseas in the course of my career.
Yeah. And where were you mostly doing your work?
Europe and Latin America, and then after I retired, I joined Barbara in a couple of her tours.
Okay. So I am wondering, how did living abroad and living in countries where the language is different, the culture is different, inform your own political beliefs? Go ahead, Barbara.
Well, I think it had an impact in a lot of different ways. Being in countries that didn't have basic, national identity that was agreed upon. I spent time in Africa in grad school, and as I said, in Latin America where there were security concerns and so on. But a big part of what really struck me is how fragile democratic systems can be, and that democracies very often get hollowed out from the inside. So it is really, really important to take care of the system that we have here and can't take it for granted.
And Rick, what about you?
So, as Barbara alluded to, I think we have a lot in our country that sometimes we don't appreciate. I think people who travel abroad sometimes see how a lot of the rest of the world lives. And so for me, it was just a greater appreciation of what we have, and which put our problems in perspective. And also, I think, maybe giving me an understanding of how we came to have all that we have, materially speaking, as Barbara said, the security and stability that we have, the political system that we have, and so on. So
I asked this question because I think it's helpful to understand how people's political values are informed before you know who they voted for and how they typically vote. But I'm going to go ahead and out you guys. Barbara is the blue in this relationship, to use Braver Angels parlance. You would consider yourself
Liberal.
Okay.
Yes.
And Rick is the red. Okay.
Conservative. Yeah.
Yes, conservative. Okay. So I'd like to know about what it was like to be in a politically divided house when you first met, and was it an issue? I mean, obviously you got together, right? So it wasn't stopping you.
Well, I have often said that when we first got married, it had more of an impact on my life that Rick doesn't like to eat onions than
I mean, yeah.
that we vote differently. And, we used to go, it's election day, we're going off to the polls first thing in the morning so we can vote before work, and we'd be like, let's go cancel each other out, But as the country changed around us, it became more of an issue.
So you have not convinced him on onions yet? Is that what you're saying? Do you eat onions?
And I haven't convinced her either.
And Rick, how did you see that when you first met Barbara?
Yeah, it was really the same thing, and that it didn't matter to me. She asked me a lot of questions. I think she hadn't had an opportunity to engage with a lot of conservatives in her life, and so she had a lot of questions trying to better understand me. And I'll put down a marker here. I didn't ask her questions, so that was something that came up later. But with each passing election, is sort of the stakes seemed to grow, the divide seemed to grow. Everything became more fraught. Then we found that in our own relationship, we were having to manage our differences a bit more.
So I'm wondering if there's a moment that you can point to where things started to feel very hard in your house.
Well, the first time that it really felt like an issue for me, it pales in comparison to what I felt later, but the first time I remember really kind of struggling a little bit was when Obama was elected for the first time, because I was over the moon, I was thrilled to pieces, and I knew that I couldn't go home and be bubbly about that, because I knew that Rick was not thrilled. And I was at work, and on a break, and I heard a woman I have never met in my life talking on the phone, and she was so jazzed about the election, and she was inviting all these friends over to the house to celebrate, and I felt like going, can I come over to your house? But that was a minor thing. When it got really, really, really hard was in 2020.
Yeah. And Rick, can you say more about what the world was looking like to you in 2020?
Yeah, in 2020, what it was looking like to me was a country that, with the pandemic, with George Floyd, with the aftermath of that on the streets around the country, the pandemic being something that was supposed to bring us together and instead divided us, I saw the country moving pretty hard to the left. And even though I didn't vote for Trump in 2016, and still was not a fan, I felt like this maybe is, having him in office is the one thing that could put the brakes on a bit. And certainly it seems to be plenty of resistance around him. So I'm going to basically vote against Biden by voting for Trump.
Right. And I think you've said to me, too, that 2020 was a vote, also for you, a vote against
Absolutely.
someone. Yeah.
It was a vote against Trump. And I knew that Rick hadn't voted for Trump in 2016. And I just blithely assumed that he wasn't going to in 2020 because we had seen how difficult that administration was. And when I became aware that he was planning to vote for Trump, I honestly felt like the earth had opened under my feet. It was so hard for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah. Just a quick show of hands. I'm wondering how familiar these stories so far sound to you. I see some nodding. I see some hands right. Yeah. So before we get to how you guys figured this out, I do want to just talk to Bill for a second and find out, does 2020 feel to you like an election that created similar issues to what you're hearing Rick and Barbara talk about?
Yes, I think so. That Trump was kind of an unknown. How he would be. He came along politically in 2015, and so some people voted for him, saying, let's give it a try. In Minnesota, we had Jesse Ventura, the wrestler, and so a number of people. And so some people in families and friendships could say, okay, you made a mistake once.
Yeah.
But in 2020 was the sense that if people were anti-Trump, that the others should now know better. It's sort of like more informed, and so it became a bit more toxic.
Yeah. So Barbara, you told me you did something kind of unusual to figure this out with your husband? What was the approach that you took to talk to him?
That time was honestly the first time in our whole relationship that I did not feel like I could even talk about it. I was so upset. So what I did was I wrote a letter. I wanted to be able to lay out all of my concerns and ask Rick how he would answer those concerns. So I wrote a long letter and gave it to him.
And Rick, what did you think? How'd you respond?
So I mean, I'll just talk about the way I felt first, which was
please.
kind of mystified as to. I mean, I knew that she really didn't like Trump. I thought she might be upset. I didn't realize it was going to be to this extent. And I kind of, on some level, wondered why I had to explain myself. I wasn't asking her to explain herself. But at the same time, she wrote a very thoughtful letter. She was, again, she was trying to understand me. She wasn't running me down or anything. And so I took it at face value and tried to write back with a thoughtful letter that articulated where I was coming from, why I had made the decision, and how I got there.
And you said to me previously, something I thought that was really interesting was that you sort of had to challenge yourself to accept Barbara as Barbara and not Barbara as liberal, right? Someone who's coming to you on her own terms with a set of political views.
So yeah, not necessarily in that particular context, but in the various conversations that we had over the years, as I said, Barbara always took this approach. She was kind of a Braver Angel before Braver Angels existed. She took this approach of really just asking me questions, trying to understand where I'm coming from. And one thing I didn't do was reciprocate. And at one point, Barbara called me out on it, and fair enough. And she said, why don't you ever ask me questions about what I think? And my response was, well, I think I know what liberals think. And I do make an effort to understand various perspectives on issues. But what I didn't get until I started spending time with Braver Angels is that wasn't the point. The point was, what does Barbara think? How did she get there? And what does that say about her as a person and our connection and everything?
Corey, I want you to respond to what Rick just described, right? Because I think it is challenging to accept people as beings who have really complicated political beliefs that come from an array of life experiences that might feel really foreign to you.
Yeah, and I think what we heard Rick say, and both Barbara and Rick say, is that they began to parse out the ideological differences and who that other person was and is, right? And I don't think that happens enough. That we lump it all together, and that ideology and that individual are all one thing, and I disagree with it wholeheartedly, and I've got to change their mind, or I don't know where this will go. I think the other thing that I heard both of them say is that there was understanding that was being sought. There was trying to understand. Barbara saying, I'm writing a letter. I need to understand. Rick is looking at this saying, all right, let me write a letter back so she may understand what I'm saying. And not only that, but Rick also said, well, I thought I knew what Blues or Democrats thought, and why do I need to ask you? But that wasn't the point. The point was understanding, right? And that parsing out. So I think that's a really important concept that we've already talked about a couple of times. Understanding is at the cornerstone of what we're discussing.
Now, Barbara, are you trying to convince Rick you were right?
Up until that really difficult time, I had never been trying to convince him. I really was trying to just understand where he was coming from. I know Rick to be a man of deep integrity and to be very thoughtful and very well read. And how could he look at the same facts that I look at and come to completely different conclusions? I wanted to understand that. With this, when I was really struggling with him, planning to vote for Trump, then I really was, for the first time, trying to show him what it looked like from my perspective. And what I finally figured out through this process, and it was a really difficult few days, was that he wasn't voting for Trump. He was voting against Biden. And to me, that was baffling. But that's what I needed to learn. That's what I needed to understand, was how did my side look to him?
And Rick, how did it help you talk to your wife about this stuff when you realized that she was really scrutinizing what someone like her would look like to you, right?
Yeah, and maybe in this particular case, I wasn't conflating her with liberals, or actually maybe more to the point, progressives, if I could break those out, because I knew she was a good person and came to her views, honestly, because of her life experiences and so on. And so I wasn't, when I was thinking about what bothered me about the other side, it wasn't things that I see in Barbara. And in fact, since then we've talked a lot, and some of the things I don't like about the left, she also doesn't like, if I might say, and vice versa. I mean, we have also found out that some of the things she doesn't like about the right, I don't like either.
And I bet that common ground would have been difficult to find had you not both actually been curious, right?
Absolutely.
So Bill, I want you to talk about curiosity and how that fits into the Braver Angels ethos.
Oh, it's everything. And I'm just so touched hearing this story and those pivotal moments. And to reflect what Corey was saying, it's curiosity about this person who I care about, not just intellectual curiosity about left and right and all that. I want to know you and how you see yourself in this mix.
Yeah.
And including why, Barbara, you said something I think is such a blind spot for so many folks. Why are you afraid of the people that I vote for, and why what's so scary?
Right.
And that's a breakthrough.
Yeah.
Okay, because so just some elements in this that are really quite powerful.
Catherine, let me say this. I think this is something that we could all maybe get some help from. Anger usually presents itself in one of two ways: very cold, very fiery. You can ask my wife. I'm a cold, angry person. I'm not going to raise my voice.
You're aloof. You're cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
she is here right
She
now.
is in the front row. She can answer that.
Yeah.
But I think that what we should all be seeking that is connected to this discussion is a warm anger. So even if I disagree with you wholeheartedly, a warm anger is curious. Help me understand why you see it that way, because I don't see it that way, but help me understand. And based that understanding, usually that experience is usually the root of why I see the world the way I see the world. If you took my upbringing and said, all right, Corey, we're going to change your entire upbringing and drop you off in a totally political, different world, I probably would see the world quite differently. I would probably see it exactly the opposite of the way I see it today. So if that is the case, I can't be mad at someone for their experience. I'm not going to be mad at you for that. That's yours. And I hope you're not going to be mad at me for mine. And then we can keep the world moving and understanding each other, I think, with a warm, curious anger is really the answer to a lot of this.
Thanks for joining MPR News at the State Fair for Talking Sense. We're going to take a quick break for news, and we'll be right back. Fake break for news? Okay.
So what is the news?
I don't have any. Welcome back. This is MPR News, and we're recording from the Minnesota State Fair today at the corner of Judson and Nelson. If you're just joining us, I'm Catharine Richert. I am the lead correspondent on Talking Sense. It's MPR News' election year project aimed at helping people have better conversations about politics in very polarized times. We also have with us Bill Doherty. He's co-founder of Braver Angels and a family and marriage therapist. Braver Angels has partnered with MPR News on Talking Sense this year. We also have Corey Yeager. He is also a family and marriage therapist. And we're joined by Barbara Thomas and Rick Hotchner. They're married. Barbara is a liberal. Rick is a conservative. And they've had to navigate the very challenging political conversations we're talking about today, but in their own house, in their own marriage. We're going to be taking some questions from the audience here, so get them ready in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to go back to Rick and Barbara's story. You guys described to me a situation where you started to really struggle in your marriage over politics, but that led you to finding Braver Angels and more broadly thinking more about how you incorporate some of those techniques of curiosity and active listening and authenticity into other relationships in your life where you didn't see eye to eye on politics. So Rick, I'm hoping you can start by talking a little bit about some of the practical things that you've deployed in your own life outside of your relationship with Barbara.
Yeah, sure. I have other family members that where we disagree to a great extent, and so Braver Angels has helped not only in terms of some of the things that helped with Barbara being able to approach conversations with curiosity and trying to understand, treating people as individuals rather than as caricatures of some label. But then also having a sense of what kinds of, profiles, roles, I think is what we talk about in families and politics that family members might take. As a couple of examples, I have family members who would be called the gladiator in families and politics. So somebody.
What's a gladiator like? Why don't you explain?
So somebody for whom politics, everything's political, and no matter the venue, no matter the situation, no matter who's around, they're going to bring up something controversial and start hammering you with their point of view, trying to convince you. I also have what we call snipers in the family, so people who are kind of just always throwing out comments. And so Braver Angels has helped me sort of spot what I'm dealing with and come up with strategies for doing that.
Now that I've been steeped in the Braver Angels way, I've recognized that I am a defender, and I jump to conclusions that don't really match the situation in any argument, whether my husband takes out the trash or not. Barbara, what are you? I mean, tell me where you fit into these communication styles.
Those communication styles, I don't know.
She's an engager.
You're an engager. Okay.
Thank you, Bill. No, I really do tend to, to ask questions and to try to get the conversation. I mean, I was a diplomat, that was my reflex before I learned the skills from Braver Angels, to just keep the conversation going, find that thing that you can agree on, even if you don't agree on the big picture. That gives you a connection that you can build on. So there's, and there's a lot of what I learned from my engagement with Braver Angels is about checking your own assumptions. And because we project so much onto people that disagree with us. And one insight that I got from a Braver Angels talk was that the notion that when we think the policies from the other side are going to cause harm or some bad outcome, we tend to assume that those people who advocate those policies actively want that bad outcome. They might be pursuing those policies for reasons that haven't occurred to us yet. But to make that distinction, if for example, somebody who's conservative thinks that a liberal policy might make people dependent on the government, they assume, so somebody who supports that policy actively wants people to be dependent on the government. So not projecting those motives and assumptions on the other side is a big part of what I've learned.
Yeah. So, Bill, Barbara brings up a really good point, and before we start taking questions, I want to just ask you, why is it so important for you to examine the own stereotypes and assumptions you have about, the other side, whatever that might be? It seems like your conversation's not going to go well if you come in with all this baggage, right?
Yeah, it's like warring stereotypes. So I'm not actually disagreeing with you, I'm disagreeing with my image of people like you. And because we get our news in such different venues now, if you're watching Fox News, it's not exactly, you're not going to get a nuanced view of liberal positions on things. If you're watching MSNBC, you're not going to get, so we get these stereotyped, simplistic ideas about where people on the other side are coming from, and more nuanced on our own. And so we have dueling stereotypes instead of finding out what you actually think. What are your actual motives?
Right.
All right, we have people here who are ready to help you with your own family situation. We already have a question here from one of our
thanks a lot for
that. Free help, take it.
The Bill Doherty question.
Right.
Go ahead. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Laura Lee from Marine on St. Croix, Minnesota. And I'm wondering where you see humor fitting in to all of this conversation. I mean, sometimes there can be mean humor, like kind of, can you believe these people, this ridiculousness? Or truly just kind of bringing that in and lightening the mood. I'd be curious what people think.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that if we can laugh, we're going to be all right. If I can laugh, even though things may seem chaotic around me, if I can get to a point that I'm still laughing, then I know that it's going to be okay. I don't know how it's going to be okay, but I understand myself well enough to say, all right, it's going to be all right. I don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to keep moving in that direction. So I think humor, laughter, deeply important, not just in these conversations, but really in life and all that we do. Holding that ability to laugh at ourselves as much as it is someone else, I think is really important.
And Bill, I've seen that a lot in some of the other organizations that are thinking about depolarization. How do we just get people to disarm themselves? I mean, what's your take on humor in all of this?
I don't believe in humor.
Oh, okay.
These are very serious problems.
And he means it.
And Corey, humor is superficial.
Yeah, that's right. Why am I not surprised with that coming from you, Bill?
Yeah. The other thing I'd add is that it's humor with, not humor about. And so it's the difference between, let's say, if Rick and I were talking and I'm a blue and he's a red, and I say, so what does my favorite conservative think about this? With a smile, okay? As opposed to, well, imagine you have some profound ideas about this, Rick. And so humor has to be with, and then it's beautiful.
Yeah. We have another question here.
Hi, Paul Thompson from Edina. Sometimes I'm having a conversation with someone that I don't agree with, and I want to show interest, and I don't know what's that opening question. Like, tell me more, or I'm struggling to understand. I'd like to hear what you think to open up a conversation where you don't know where to go.
Yeah, great question. We have a phrase we use in Braver Angels called, I'm interested in how you came to your view. Okay. That invites the story, as opposed to, I'm struggling to understand. There's nothing wrong with that, but it could imply you're not being clear with me. Okay, so how did you come to this? And then listen for a while. And so that's a phrase, how did you come to this, as opposed to why do you believe this? Okay, so that's a particular phrase I can offer.
Corey, what's your go-to?
Yeah, I often say, help me understand. Help me, because I'm asking for your assistance here. And if I'm asking for your assistance, that means I want something. I want to understand. Right? I'm not being aloof about it. I really and truly want you to help me understand that position. And again, I think the cornerstone to that is saying, and I don't have to agree with you. To understand you, I don't have to agree with you. But I do want to understand that. So I use that terminology of help me understand a lot.
And as a journalist, actually, I use those exact words too. I do not assume that I am the smartest person in the room, and I think that's a good approach for these conversations as well.
It's always, though, a matter of the nonverbals that go with it.
Okay.
So if it's like, help me understand how somebody could possibly believe it, so it's got to be like the humor. It's got to be real. It has to be genuine.
Yes.
We'd love to get more questions, but I want to know also from the audience, how many people ascribe to the idea that we just don't talk about politics or religion? It's off the menu, so to speak. There we go. Got some in the back. Hey, someone walking by too. And we should be able to talk about that. 100%. We have someone in the audience saying we should be able to talk about that. And I think that there's some value there. I mean, Corey, what is...
There's a microphone.
Yeah.
Let's hear your name. We want to know your name first and where you're from. Go ahead.
Debbie.
Okay.
I live in St. Bonifacius. I believe I'm from originally Iowa. My husband's from Ohio. And we've lived all over the world in the Air Force. We ended up here. But I honestly believe that any party, any disbeliefs of religion, politics, anything, should be able to talk about it. Because I respect other people and their beliefs. I've always have. And they should respect me.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, Corey, you and I have talked about this a lot through the course of this project. It feels really uncomfortable to have these conversations sometimes. But I'm wondering, is there something you're missing out on in an already important relationship when you can't talk about politics or other things that might be divisive?
I think it's extremely unique to the relationship. I oftentimes say, as a family therapist, there is no normal across families. My family, if you watch and see what time we eat dinner and what time we go to bed, that's normal to my family. But if I took all of that and imposed it on another family, they would say, well, why do you eat dinner so late? And why are you doing, right? Because there's no normal across family. So what we may miss out on, I think is very unique to the individual and the family. I do think that we have to also understand the reality versus what we think it should be. We think it should be that we can discuss all of these things all of the time, but the reality is people get triggered. People don't like the discussion and they don't know how to handle it. So how can we put parameters and boundaries around these ideas and discussions? Because the most important thing is my family. Right? The political understanding that I have, and if someone doesn't agree with me, it's more important that my family stays intact, that we can continue to move through this world together as opposed to agreeing on a political view. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I'd add is that we're using the word family. It's made up of a bunch of different individuals. So when somebody just the other day said, I can't talk to my family about politics because everything blows up, so to preserve the relationships, he doesn't. And then I asked him, is that true of everybody in your family? Well, not true of everybody in his case. So try one-to-one. I don't actually recommend in politically divided families unless you are very far above average, right?
Well, we are Minnesotans.
Yeah, but no, we're just a middle. I mean, so no Minnesota family. A family-level discussion where there is strong disagreement about politics, very dicey. Because whoever is the weak link is going to take it down, the person who blows up. So what I think about family conversations about politics, and this is what I do in my extended family, I think of them as one-to-one.
Yes.
And start with somebody who you think you could talk to. But don't do this, I can't talk to my family. Okay, well, I'm not saying don't do it, but think about the family as a collection of individuals and see if you can try with one.
Mm-hmm. Rick, I want to know, and Barbara, I want to know too, these conversations clearly were not easy for you to have. You have figured out a way to have them. Do you feel like you have a better relationship because of them?
I was just thinking about that when Corey and Bill were answering your question, because I do think time and place and who and all those things matter when you're talking about politics and probably religion as well. But if there are, in my case, I'll say with Barbara, I think it has made us closer because I was very reticent to talk about politics before we went sort of through that crucible in 2020 and then found Braver Angels. And there's other members of my family that I've come to realize recently. It's one thing to put somebody off episodically, this isn't the time to talk about this, let's get on a phone call next week or have coffee. It's another thing to say, I'm not going to talk about politics with that person. And that might be the best answer, but that means there's a part of the connection there that's not going to happen if you do that.
Yeah. Barbara, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's it is important to pick when you're going to engage, and to pick how you're going to engage. And one of the things that we've talked about with other members of the family is just saying, we don't have to talk about politics, but if we are going to, let's do it on these terms. Let's agree ahead of time that we just want to understand each other. And that can kind of if the other person agrees to that, it can kind of disarm, the urge to fight. And if you just can set those terms ahead of time, it can really, open some doors.
And then maybe model it as well.
Yeah.
In terms of, okay, let the other person go first, ask questions, listen, try to understand, identify where there's agreement, all those things. That then sort of, as Barbara said, lowers the temperature and creates a foundation for further discussion.
We're still taking questions from the audience. Maybe there's a particular problem in your family you want to troubleshoot or get some advice on. You can talk to one of our folks in a Talking Sense t-shirt. While we're figuring out what that question is, I just really quickly, Bill, can you go back and talk a little bit about the communication styles that you can learn more about at mprnews.org/Talking Sense. But you kind of break it down into these different styles of communication. A gladiator, a sniper, an engager, the defender, like myself. If you're about to start a conversation with, say, a gladiator, what might be something you say to them out of the gate? And what might be something you want to avoid?
Yeah, so the gladiator is the family member who's determined to set everybody straight on politics. And everybody, I think most extended families have somebody. So I always think about, Uncle Rob and cousin Samantha, okay? I'll just make them a red and a blue. Okay, Uncle Rob is convinced that, every liberal is work of the devil, and so we'll straighten you out. And then cousin Samantha is ready to pounce if you don't use correct terminology for everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I know these people. Go ahead.
You haven't kept up with all the memos about correct terminology, and then bang, they'll just go after you. And so a big thing with somebody who's doing that is to not get hooked.
Yeah. Not
get hooked. It doesn't mean they're bad people. This is their style. And you can not get hooked. And so I remember once with a family member, it was a gladiator, I said, "Oh, that was good. That was really good. You were trying to get me. Very good." Okay? And then he laughed, and we just moved on. So the harder one is the sniper, who just sort of, you're having a conversation, and then somebody says, "Well, what is our family feminist progressive think about that one, Barbara?" Okay, and there, you talked about humor. A lot of times, it's a little humor. Just roll with it. Well, this particular feminist progressive actually wants to finish the spaghetti right now, and so can we just in other words, so a little humor on that. But we also talk about an engager, and that's what we're talking about here. How do you engage with people? You don't have to go one up or one down. The other thing I want to add, just so we don't seem unrealistic here, is that sometimes you have to be able to set boundaries with people. So in our workshops, we always talk about not just these wonderful, touchy-feely, I want to understand you. But at the end, we always say, skills for difficult moments. How to get out of a conversation that is going badly. Or when you're just pushing, I don't know why I'm looking at you in this court, pushing stuff on me, and I'm saying, let's finish up, and they keep at me. We have skills for what we call a soft exit, a medium exit, and a hard exit. Soft exit is, why don't we move on? Medium exit would be, this isn't going well. And the hard exit would be that this.
Keep going. Okay, Bill. Yeah.
This conversation is now over.
Mm-hmm.
I've told you twice I'm done.
Yeah.
You've kept at me. The conversation is over, and you exit.
Yeah.
So there are. The thing is, unless you have good defensive boundary setting skills, it's hard in families to wade into this. So you have to be willing to set a boundary and a limit as well.
Why does it feel
Let's-
like I've heard Bill use the hard exit with me a lot?
I think he's practiced at it.
Yeah.
That's
What
some
was that,
really
Corey?
good, really,
With me.
really
What
good
was that?
practical tips. So we have another question from the audience. Go ahead. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Margot, and I live in Mankato. We're just back from family reunion a month ago with my husband's family in the Finger Lakes of New York, and he has one sibling who has taken kind of an ethical, moral stance and put the rest of us on the opposite side. And it's been really hard to get across that barrier. And I hear you talking about engagement, and I would love to get some strategies from you about how we might engage across what's feeling like a really wide gulf.
Could you
They
give us-
haven't come for 3 years. It's primarily about their very strong religious and ethical perspectives around abortion.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a difficult question, so I'm going to let Corey handle that one.
Oh my goodness. Well, I do think, especially around an issue that's hot button like that, finding the ability to agree to disagree and conveying that to the other individual, right? Because if I can convey to you, hey, we're just not going to agree on this, and I still rock with you. I still like you. We have so much more in common. So we're just going to agree to disagree, and let's keep moving. Even saying some of those words about agreeing to disagree and talking about the commonalities that we hold, right? I think it's one of the things that we can do is my grandmother used to always to say, it's not really what you're saying, it's how you say it. So if I'm going to tell you that we're going to agree to disagree, I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to continue on by saying, because we share a lot of things together that we all get along with. And I'm going to touch on 2 or 3 of those because they'll shadow a bit of those other issues, and that may be an opportunity to help us move forward. Now Doc is going to tell me that I'm wrong, and we can move forward.
No, you were only partially.
That's right.
No, I like that. It gave me time to think about what I wanted to
That's
say,
right.
too. So I didn't listen to you, actually. So thank you for that question. And I agree with what Corey said about seeing if there's room to agree to disagree and then move on. But the other thing, if you really wanted to be brave, you went. I might say, I'm struggling. I do this one-to-one. I struggle as we talk about abortion, and I hear and appreciate how deeply you feel about this, and this is a deeply moral, ethical issue, and I appreciate your passion, and I know that this is so important to you. What I'm struggling with is the sense, and I don't know if this is true, but I'm struggling with the sense that because I don't agree with you, you're making a moral judgment about me, and I don't know if that's true or not. But that's what I'm struggling with in our conversation. Now, that would be tricky to pull off. It would be one-to-one, but it would be fully transparent. Because that's the heart of this for you, is the moral judgment. So you'd have to rehearse that one.
Yeah.
You couldn't do it when you were upset. And you'd have to be prepared for whatever they did with that. That's okay. But you would have named the core thing for you.
I've got a few more questions I want to ask everyone before we wrap up here in about 5 minutes. Bill and Corey, there's so much disinformation out there, right? A lot of these fights center around what's true and what isn't. And I think we live in a moment where it's sometimes really hard to figure out what is accurate and what isn't. I'm wondering if someone has someone in their family whose views are informed by what they view to be disinformation, how do you navigate around that? What might you say, or how might you approach conversations when there's no common set of facts there? Bill, go ahead.
You want me to go first, so you can put me down
me,
afterwards.
You got me last time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. Here's my brief response. Policy-relevant facts are about who we trust. Okay, and so we have different sources of trust, different news areas, different. I believe one politician, you believe another. So we don't have to agree on the facts, or we're never going to have a conversation. And so what I do and what we try to teach at Braver Angels is say, this is my understanding of the facts about it, and this is how I came to this. You may have a different view. Tell me where you came to this, but not going one up, not saying you're wrong, I'm right.
Ditto.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm ditto
great.
with that.
We're in agreement. Whoa, we're in agreement. Amazing. So really quickly, before we wrap up, I want to just go down the line and hear from you what your post-election strategies will be after November 5th? Yeah. People are going to be enraged and upset kind of no matter what happens, right? No matter where you are in the political spectrum. So
Yeah.
where's your heads at and how you're going to navigate those days after this year's election?
That is a big question. I think, just holding space open for the people in my life that I care about who have different views and different fears about what different outcomes of this election can mean. And frankly, I cope with it by getting involved in the volunteering work that I'm doing with Braver Angels, because this is a group of people around the country who are trying to be part of the solution.
Rick, what's your go-to strategy? Quick fire around here.
Yeah, I think she took all my answers. I think sense of humor is going to be important, actually. Just being able to look at the situation, whatever it is, and be able to find the humor in it, because there's going to be a heck of a lot to worry about, and there's a lot of stuff to fear. So,
Bill?
I want to say that we, the people, are bigger than our government. We are bigger than an election. We can get through this together. We have done it before as a country. As a people, we will do it again.
So I will continue to love the people that I love. I will impact the small systems that I'm a part of. And I will help and discuss the ways in which to insulate from chaos. That's the work that I'll do.
I want to thank our guests so much and our audience for joining us for Talking Sense at the State Fair today. If you want to learn more about Talking Sense, you can go to mprnews.org/Talking Sense, where all our reporting is. And if you're interested in learning more about Braver Angels, you can visit with Bruce and Melinda over there, who can tell you more. Thank you so much for being with us today.